earlier. What's it like to have God to be opposed to you? Hebrews, the 10th chapter, tells us that it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. God being opposed to us, I think, is kind of concept we probably don't think about enough. What is it like? And yet passages like Romans, the 1st chapter, verse 18, tell us about his wrath. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and all unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. The wrath of God is revealed. And he's looking at all men when he says that. It's revealed from heaven that there are times when God is opposed to us. In Numbers 22, we can read about a man named Balaam. And for many of us, Balaam is a great story when we're kids because it's about a bad guy who fails to be bad and a talking donkey, and that's great for telling a story, right? But for adults, there's important lessons from Balaam. And we can understand that in part by how his character is described by Peter, for example, in 2 Peter, where he says of Balaam, he loved gain from wrongdoing. Not just that he was greedy. It doesn't just say he was greedy. He loved gain from wrongdoing. He liked to lead people into doing bad things. And we see that in his story eventually. He does that to the nation of Israel. It also talks about the fact that that talking donkey restrained the prophet's madness. And I think that's a really key term for us to think about also with regard to that sense of gaining from doing wrongdoing, that there's a sense of madness about that. Balaam is interesting. So, context for Numbers 22 is that the people of Israel are traveling from Egypt and they're close to the promised land. They are going up on the eastern side of the Jordan River. They have conquered some nations before they get to Moab. And Balak is the king of Moab. And he's seen the victories of the people of Israel, and he's very afraid of them. He doesn't think he can win in battle, so how is he going to stop them? And the answer for that question is he decides he's going to get a guy named Balaam from Mesopotamia. He's going to send a delegation to him. He's going to get this Balaam to curse the people of Israel. So he sends his leading men to them, and offers him money. He says, why don't you come curse the people of Israel? And he says, well, let me talk to God about it first, which is pretty impressive in some ways. And even though he's been offered money, and we know that's a temptation for him, God says, you're not going to go with them. They are blessed, and you're not going to curse them. So those representatives go back to Balak, king of Moab, and he sends them again with more money. Because if you know about someone being greedy, that's how you're going to get them to do what you want, is give them more money. So he says, well, let me ask God again. Does he already know God's answer? He knows God's answer. But he says, well, let me go ask again. So I don't think this part is genuine on his part about what he's doing. And God actually says, well, you can go if they ask. And so he got up and went. So in a sense, God gives him permission, but it's knowing that he's already been told him no. Balaam gets on his donkey that he's had for a lifetime, and he follows with all the princes of Moab. It's really important for us to remember in this story, he's not alone. So as he's going on his way, we find out God is angry at his disobedience. Okay? It's very clear. He's done something wrong by making this choice. And as he's traveling to Moab, the angel of Jehovah opposes him. The donkey actually can see the angel of Jehovah, but Balaam can't. And he sees the drawn sword, and the donkey turns off the road and goes into a field. Balaam beats his donkey and gets her back on the road. But I want you to remember, he's not traveling alone. This is the great prophet that has been, that Balak has called, and now he looks foolish. Because as far as he and anyone else knows, all of a sudden his donkey just off the side of the road. So he's mad at his donkey. As they go along, the donkey sees the angel of Jehovah again. This time it's in a narrow part of the path. And so she can't turn right or left. And so she crushes his foot up against the wall. And he beats her again to get her getting in the middle of the road. And of course, again, remember, those who are with Balaam, what do they see? He can't drive a donkey. Right? But that looks foolish. He doesn't look like an amazing prophet at that point, does he? They go on down the road, and the angel of Jehovah, they see him again. The donkey sees him again. She can't turn right or left. The road is so narrow at this point, she just lays down. Balaam is angry at this point. Again, remember, he's not alone. He's not just angry because of what the donkey is doing. I think he's angry because of how it makes him look. He strikes her again with his staff. And that's when Jehovah opens the mouth of the donkey and lets the donkey talk to Balaam. What have I done that you've struck me these 3 times? Well, if you think about it, she went into a field. We know it's a female. She went into a field, she crushed my foot, and lay down under me. And so Balaam doesn't give that. He says, you've made a fool of me. Have you ever thought about saying that to one of your pets or one of your livestock? I've never had livestock, but I've had pets. You've made a fool of me. Who do you blame? The animal or the owner? You've made a fool of me, he says to her. I wish I had a sword in my hand, then I would kill you. That would prove who's in charge. That would prove that he's not just a fool, wouldn't it? And she says to him, am I not your donkey on which you've ridden all these years? Do I have a habit of treating you this way? And what she's saying is, I've been a good donkey. I've never done any of that. And Balaam has to admit it. He says, no. What else could he say? But understand, Balaam didn't know that she had saved his life 3 times. What the donkey had done for his good, he perceived as bad. And finally, Jehovah opens Balaam's eyes. And now he sees the angel with the sword. And he bows down and falls on his face. Everything's changed now, hasn't it? Now that he can see the reality of what's happening, now he falls down. And the angel of Jehovah asks him, why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? I've come out to oppose you. There was no good reason for what Balaam had done. But he was ignorant. He was ignorant of what was happening. And so the angel of Jehovah continues, the donkey saw me and turned aside these 3 times. If she had not turned aside from me, surely now I would have killed you and let her live. That's one of those great twists in a story, right? If I had my sword, Balaam said, I'd have killed you. And the angel says, if it wasn't for her, you would be dead. I would have killed you. I've come out to oppose you. He says, because your way is perverse. Perverse in this passage has the idea of being crooked. How was it crooked? What was Balaam's intent in going to Israel? Make money, right? From wrongdoing. But it's perverse because he'd been told, you're not going to bless them. You're not going to curse them. They're a blessed people. The word perverse also has the idea of reckless. And I think that's really important when we connect it with what Peter said when it says the donkey restrains the prophet's madness. That's how intent he was on making money, is with that madness. And he was so focused on it, he didn't even understand. So that's when he says, I have sinned. Because when you see an angel standing before you with a sword, I can't say it now. Sword, thank you. I really want that W pronounced. And he tells you, I would have killed you now 3 times. Well, all of a sudden your attitude changes, doesn't it? I have sinned, Balaam says. For I did not know that you stood in the road against me. I didn't know you were opposed to me. He's ignorant of Jehovah's wrath. He's ignorant of the danger that he's in and how close he is to death. And even though the donkey had saved him 3 times, he had been angry enough by these slights to try to kill her because it made him look foolish. And until he saw the angel of Jehovah with the sword in his hand, he ignorantly continued in his sin. Am I as oblivious as Balaam? Are we as oblivious as Balaam? That we don't think that God is opposed? Is most of the world ignorant of Jehovah's wrath? As the world looks at itself, it clearly recognizes that things are not what they should be, that something is terribly wrong. Man recognizes that we have great problems in the world. There's constant war, there's civil unrest, the earth is going through weird things, people are hungry and abused, and there's still slavery, and there's diseases and pandemics that are killing people. Families are in crisis, and individually people are facing depression and grief and hopelessness, and the world looks at all of that, and what do they think? We know what God thinks. God says the problem is sin. God says sin is the problem and sin is pervasive in this world. The angel of Jehovah had said to Balaam, I'm opposed to you. And things were going pretty bad for him, weren't they? When the angel of Jehovah was opposed to them. Because your way is reckless. Your way is perverse before me. That's what sin is. Now, we know in the scriptures that God has a great solution for us, that through Christ, he wants to reconcile, he says, to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven. He wants to bring everything back together, making peace by the blood of the cross. He has this wonderful solution. But this reminds us that the problem of sin that we're talking about, it's not just individual, it's much bigger than that. And what solutions has man tried? And have they worked? Long time ago, 1971, I do remember when this song came out. It's one of the most popular songs John Lennon ever did. It was a very popular song. Released in October of 1971. It used to be played constantly. Since I don't listen to radio anymore, I don't know if it's still played a lot. And in that song, he wants us to imagine. He says, imagine there's no heaven and no hell. He says, imagine there's no countries, that there's no religion, that there's no possessions. Just people living for today. Living life in peace. A brotherhood of mankind. Sharing all the world. And I'm pretty sure Matthew would say, that's just hippie talk. that was very prominent at that time. What's the message behind the song? By the way, I love the music. The music for the song is great. But the message is mankind can solve our own problems. All we have to do is choose to change. Just decide to make the problems go away, and all of us will start to behave and to be nice to everybody, and we'll just progress to this point where, there's no conflict. We'll just do that. Has it worked? 1971 was a long time ago. Has it worked? Or is it still just imagination? Solomon followed actually a very similar train of thought in the book of Ecclesiastes. Through the Holy Spirit, he partakes in this, I'm going to say a brave experiment, because that's what I feel like right now. A brave experiment in the book of Ecclesiastes where he says, what if there is no God? And if there's no God, then what's the purpose and what's the meaning of life? And so he says, well, I tried wisdom. I'm going to focus on this one and we're going to move fast. But he said, I'm tried wisdom and knowledge. Do these things provide meaning for our lives? In the 1800s, the late 1800s, there's a period of time that's called the Enlightenment. What do we mean by enlightenment? We're so smart, right? The light is dawning on us and we're so smart. And you know what happens during that period of time that we speak of the Enlightenment? It led to 2 world wars, a lot of genocide. It was horrible because we tried knowledge. We tried wisdom of man, let's be clear. And it failed miserably. Solomon went on. He says, I tried pleasure and laughter. I tried wine. I built great works. I had slaves. Most of us would never consider that a part of this experiment. But for Solomon, at that time, that was part of it, right? I have slaves. I have herds and flocks. Silver, gold, treasure. I've got lots of that. Singers. Even work. Solomon said, I went to work. And what does he say about all of these things? It's all vanity. Because if there is no God, then there's no afterlife, so death ends everything, and there's no real justice, and there's no real purpose in life. We're just alive. You're not going to find wisdom. You're not going to find a solution for sin in any of those things. If there's no God, how do we cope with our failures? How do we cope with our sin and the fact that death ends all things? Psychology came around in the 1800s also. Psychology is the study of the soul. There have been some interesting things in it, but we have Jung, we have Freud, we have Skinner. They all came up with different ideas about what makes people tick. And some of them said it was about sexual things, and some said it was about repressed things, and some said it was the environment you were raised in, or your conditioning, or your behavior. And since those 1800s, has it worked? 135 years or so ago, do we still have wars and murders, mental issues and depression? Has psychology helped us solve the problem of sin? What about drugs? Altering reality, I'm going to put it that way. Whether legal or illegal. And drugs, they're readily available now in a lot of ways. They might be used to help me deal with my problems as a way of escape, or a way to feel happy and kind of ignore what's happening. Or, like when I was a kid, just to be cool, and fit in with the group. Has it worked to deal with sin? Abraham Lincoln once asked this question. He said to a group, if you call a sheep's tail a leg, how many legs will he have? And they said 5. And his response was wrong. Calling it a leg doesn't make it one. And whitewashing sin doesn't change it from what it really is. I don't know how true that is. That might be a preacher story. We often will quote Isaiah 5 about this. In Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20, where God says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil." We often stop there, but it keeps going. Who put darkness for light and light for darkness, and who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. And we look at those people outside these walls and we say, man, those people have done that so bad. It's true. But he was writing to his people when he said that. He was writing to the people to whom had been given the law of Moses, where it had been revealed to them exactly what was good and what was right and what was light. And they were the ones who had made the change. Do we sometimes alter the truth to fit what we want? And I'm not just talking about them out there. I'm talking about me right here. We complain that they've changed adultery to just a sin, fornication to sexual freedom. If you're going to make a deal, it's okay to lie because it's okay to do that, and so that way you gain wealth. It's just shrewdness in business. But it's not just them, it's also us. There's a sense in which altering the truth to our own truth, I want to say here it's denying God, but really it's redefining God to being me. I define my truth. And I get to change, therefore, what the meaning of sin and judgment and heaven and hell is about. I get to change what it means when it says God is love. I get to define all of those things. And the people of Israel went through a period of time where they did this. And in Judges 17 and verse 6, it says, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Do we live in that time? It's pretty similar. And again, that's not just outside. The question is, has it worked? Has that dealt with sin to just redefine the truth? Sometimes people have looked to false gods as a way of redefining truth, false worship. And I love the story of Elijah on Mount Carmel with a contest where the prophets of Baal build their altar and Elijah builds his altar. And the prophets of Baal, as they're trying to get the altar to light on fire, they spend all day dancing, praying, going around the altar. Their intensity ramps up as the day goes on to the point where they're cutting themselves to shed blood, and nothing happens. And Elijah mocks them, saying, maybe your God is asleep, or he's gone off on a trip, or something like that. But as funny as that is to us, have not we often made our own gods? And then we wonder why they don't answer us. But the thing is, as great as that contrast is, by the way, the contrast is Elijah kneels down and prays and poof, it works because God is real. But Israel was subject to this also. Micah 6 verses 6 through 8. Very famous passage. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before him on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings and calves a year old? Yes, that's exactly what's in the law. That is exactly what you should do. But then the questioner goes on to ask, will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams with 10,000 rivers of oil? If one sacrifice is good, let's do 1,000. And that harkens back to the time of Solomon. Solomon did that on a daily basis. Thousands of sacrifices. If God wants one, let me give him 1,000. Will that deal with my sin? The next question is this: shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? If burnt offerings and oil, if those are good, and if that's going to be pleasing to God, let me give him something really meaningful. Let me give him my kid. And I don't mean the goat kid. My child. For my sin. I mean, isn't that a real sacrifice? Wouldn't that be giving up a lot to God? Wouldn't that be pleasing to God if I give up my firstborn and that would cover my sins? You know those questions are never answered in that text? He just goes on to give the real answer. Because the Israelites should have known at that point, by the time you get to offering my firstborn for the sin of my soul, that that's just not right. But don't we go to extremes sometimes to say, won't you take this to pay the price for my sins? If God's opposed to me, what will it take? And that's where Micah 6:8 comes in. He says, he's told you, oh man, what's good. Here it is. Here's the profound part, right? What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and walk humbly with God? Bam. They didn't see that coming, did they? Because they were so wrapped up in their false idea of worship and their wrong ideas about God. He's told you what he wants. He wants you to be his child. He wants you to be like him. So sometimes we alter God's word. That's a way that's common. Has Satan actually said this to you? Paul talked about the Pharisees as having done this when they established a righteousness of their own in Romans 10. Sometimes we can change the plan of salvation or change the way we worship. And has that worked? Again, I don't know if this is actually true or not. It's on the internet. There's a Dakota proverb. Origins of this Dakota proverb are unknown. Okay? The Dakota proverb says, when you find yourself on a dead horse, dismount. There are a lot of versions of that. Right? And it's been suggested that our society doesn't really pay attention, and I would go ahead and say the whole world doesn't really pay attention to that. We often have the idea instead that we can flog the horse harder and maybe it will move. Or if we buy it a new saddle, maybe that will help. But we kind of try to do things. And we've done this with sin. We've tried so many solutions. Mankind has tried so many solutions for sin. But they haven't worked. Because we think we can solve our own problems, and yet we keep making things worse. Despite all of our optimism and our enlightenment, and all we need is us. But the real problem is that God is opposed to us and we don't look to him. And there's a solution. So let's take this out of the whole big wide world thing and put it right down at home. How do you deal with your sin? What solutions have you tried for your sin? How do you cope with the guilt and the sorrow and the suffering for yourself and maybe for others that you've caused because of your sin? In Acts, the 4th chapter, if you'll turn there with me, Peter gives a brilliantly concise answer to this. Acts, the 4th chapter. And we're going to be in verses 11 and 12. I think I want to start at verse 10. It'll still be concise. right? Let it be known to all of you, to the people of Israel, that by the name of Christ Jesus of Nazareth, whom you crucified, whom God raised from the dead, by him this man is standing before you well. This Jesus is the stone that was rejected by you, the builders, which has become the cornerstone. I love that picture he puts before the people of Israel that says, there's the solution to Christ, you rejected him. Sometimes we'll try anything other than what God has offered. And so he goes on in verse 12, and there is salvation in no one else, for there's no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. What's the solution? God is standing opposed to you, and yet he provides a solution to sin. The Hebrew writer put it this way: consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost. Don't you love that expression? Not just save a little bit, but to save to the uttermost. Consequently, he's able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. Full forgiveness, dealing with sin, your sin, the world's sin, all the things that are there. There's only one hope, and that's in Jesus. He's your only hope. He's the world's only hope. And that's why we preach Christ crucified and look to him for a great salvation. We want to offer you that at this time. Let me switch